If you haven't seen my latest video, I would highly recommend that you go and watch that. It breaks down how I did at the Vision Clash of Kings tournament. Alongside my Kagero deck, I brought this Dark Irregulars build. It is an extension of all of my experience playing that free-to-play Dark Irregulars deck that I built back in the Japanese server. The goal of the deck is similar to the free-to-play deck. We will be trying to use Amon's ability of Counterblast 1 and put a card into your soul to, one, make him bigger, because he'll get plus 1k, and then we get to randomly hit a card in the back row, and then if they have no more in the back row, we can then start hitting their front row stuff. So this deck is more of a board control deck than anything. It is technically less efficient than Kagero, but the 1-for-1 trades that this deck can do, it feels very powerful in certain matchups. I used to think that if Amon was not able to pop stuff in the front row, that he wasn't being used to his full potential. After like lots and lots of games with this deck, lots of losses and lots of wins, Amon's strength is in able to get rid of stuff in the back row that your opponent is trying to protect. This is a very powerful ability when you consider that Tejas on the Japanese server is about to be errated. A big thing about this deck that I was also trying to go for was to try to capitalize on Doreen the Thruster. She gets plus 3k every time a card is soul charged during your main phase. This means she does not work if you were to soul charge during your ride phase, for example, such as if you rode Flirtatious Succubus. But the thing with Doreen is that then she can guarantee hitting columns multiple times, especially if Amon has a very big soul built up. It can do some pretty crazy plays, and if not, she's at least usually a 9k booster. I'm going to quickly go through kind of the weird choices that I decided to go with this deck versus maybe some of the typical builds that you'll see on like Twitter. A lot of the choices I made was in consideration with the triple rares that I have. I only have one NLK and two Adel Rose. With that, NLK is a great finisher, being able to swing for 23 and a crit. If you saw my previous video, you saw that I did misplay with him, which cost me the game. If you believe in NLK, he will pull through for you. And if you just kind of swing around willy-nilly, he can cost you games. Adel Rose is also a great addition to the deck. I originally only had one before the tournament, and then the night before I opened some packs and I pulled one of hers, so she was a great addition to the deck. She has the same ability as Royal Paladin's Gancelot, that you can put her back into the deck and search out a specific grade 2. And she has that whole, if you ride her, you can counterblast 2, and she gets a crit. It's not, I don't think I've ever ridden her. It is a thing you can do if you need crit pressure. The thing that makes her worse than Gancelot is that the grade 2 she searches is just a 10k vanilla. In this deck, we do need access to it for the defensive power, but then it not synergizing with the rest of the deck means that later on, it becomes less relevant. I play the 4 Earth Gunner because the 13k attacks he can do if boosted makes it so he can hit for magic numbers. In combination with Doreen the Thruster, he can even get past many defensive triggers, so he can make for a great push on a final turn. Now so this is kind of where I got a little weird with the deck. I was originally playing Still Vampires, which a lot of people typically do as kind of a backup. What I was noticing is that basically 90+% of games I played, if I drew Still Vampire, he would be a 10k vanilla the entire game. I decided to switch him for Basilbub because I feel like Basilbub is a weaker unit, but is more flexible in this deck. Now, I believe if you have more NOKs, you can use Still Vampire's Mega Blast on Rearguard, so you can place a Rearguard of theirs on Vanguard, and then with all your Counterblast face down after Still Vampire, you can still use NOK. The hard thing with Still Vampire is that you basically have to hold out the entire game on not using any of your Counterblast. On the other hand, Basilbub is someone we can use offensively and defensively. His Counterblast of 2 to give some of our stuff 3k doesn't hinder the deck. It's not powerful. It's not really useful, but it's still something we can use if we need it, and it doesn't cripple us the rest of the game. because we'll still be able to use Amon's counterblast. We'll still be able to use Gwyn the Ripper's counterblast. It gives us some flexibility. Also, being an 11k on the opponent's turn is very helpful in protecting us so that we can have a better chance of finding our Amon later on. In the grade 2 slot, I play 3 Gwyn the Ripper. I don't think he is needed at 3. I feel like running Gwyn at 1 or 2 is more ideal in most situations. I decided to play a 3rd going into this tournament because I knew I was going to be going up against Kagero and Spike Brothers. They both play Conroe and Mecha Trainer, which if I get rushed, I would be able to use Gwyn the Ripper on turn 2 and snipe them in the back row if I choose to damage deny them. He also makes for a great endgame card. If you hold on to just one in your hand, you can use him to get rid of an interceptor and be able to push on a final turn. So the less of him you play, the less likely you are to get to him, in which there's going to be some turns where Amon is not going to be able to deal with anything in the front row, in which you're going to have turns where you're just not going to be able to get past interceptors, and you're going to have a lot of turns where you just swing at Vanguard only once per turn. Flirtatious Succubus is here just for the easy soul charging. Same with Alluring Succubus, so I play them both at 4-ofs. I do play only 3 Werewolf Seekers. I think the less Adel Rose you have, the less you need him, and the more Adel Rose you have, the more you'll need him, because you'll never want to draw an Adel Rose and then have gone through all your Werewolf Seekers in the deck, especially because we also soul charge, so there is a better chance that he will get taken out of the deck. He kind of falls into this category of what Dark Irregulars has its main issue, is that we have a lot of powerful singularity pieces, but nothing is really kind of connecting them all together. Besides its synergy with Adel Rose, it's just kind of this awkward card. I play 3 Decadent Succubus because it allows for some cool combos with a Doreen on turn 2. It also allows us to accumulate a lot of soul on games that we think we need to be a little more aggro, so that when we go for an Amon, he's going to be very big the turn he comes out. She does incentivize an early game rush, because the more cards you lay on your turn 2, the more cards you'll get into your soul, and if you have a Doreen the Thruster out, the bigger she will get. She is a vanilla turn 3 forward. Once we get access to more selective soul charging, she'll probably get cut very quickly, because having to soul charge these triggers really does hurt. And then the last of the grade 1s, besides the PGs, is Poet of Darkness Amon. I totally understand if you'd rather play Prisoner Beast here rather than him, because early game he is just a 6k vanilla. They do the same goal of boosting. It's not like Amon helps make a perfect number that Prisoner Beast doesn't help, especially in tandem with Earth Gunner. The reason I play him is that because him being a 9k makes it so he can get rid of interceptors by himself. All of our starters suck. Both of their arts are beautiful. I love them aesthetically, but neither of them add anything to the deck. Yeah, they both go to soul, but they don't really help us with a game plan in any way. I chose Vermilion because him having a 5k butt makes it a little easier to boost. His soul charging does have some uses on a turn that we want to boost Doreen and we're out of CB, but for the most part, even if you run Devil and Shadow, you will just be using them for Amon fodder. I play 9 draws and 4 heals because the deck doesn't really have any form of draw power, and we need to get as many pieces that we can so that Amon has a lot of resources he can use to like machine gun the opponent's back row. A card I was playing around with and was surprisingly enjoying was Fallen Angel. Originally looking at her, I always thought her Soul Blast was too much, that her 11k butt wasn't really needed. I still don't think it's needed, but having that kind of just card that says, okay, you need to get past me, I would recommend if you only have like 1 to 0 Adel Roses, try playing around with Fallen Angel. I think she will pull a lot more weight than you think she will. Going back to Doreen for a second, the bad thing about Doreen, like a lot of the reasons people don't want to play her, she basically requires a soul charge to be able to do anything. And some people consider this a hindrance because it feels like she forces you to make a play that you might not want to. My counter to that is that I feel like if you're not soul charging in some capacity every turn, you are probably not progressing the board state very much. And if you are not soul charging on purpose, to maybe hold back on your resources, that means you're probably not going for a big attack, which means you don't need a big booster. I feel like the turns that she's able to boost for 12, 15, 18 is more important than the turns that she's only able to boost for 6. This deck doesn't really have combos. It does have some synergies, but for the most part, it's going to be more like Unga Boonga turns. Like, I blow stuff up, I swing hard. That's usually a good turn for us. Sometimes hitting magic numbers can be a little awkward in this build, so being smart on when to place a booster and where to place them is very important. For example, I used to never boost Amon because I felt like he would be able to do everything by himself. And for the most part, if you can, you usually just want him to be perhaps the second or first swing at Vanguard so that the drive trigger check power can go to a rear guard. But let's say that he's the biggest card on the board, but only by a slight amount. There have been plenty of turns where I've placed Poet behind Amon just to make him hit for a magic number at the opponent's Vanguard for a third swing. Going up against the meta, Risers being the best deck, it means you're probably going to run into it the most. Its biggest weakness is that they are going to have to put at least 2 rear guards into its soul, so it does have to go through some resources. We can take advantage of that. If we're going first, we have an easier time popping their units, especially if they're in the back row and they're hiding. And then if we are going second, then they've probably already got the units into their soul. This does mean now that they are low on resources, so they probably only have just a couple cards on board besides Perfect Riser, which means Amon is going to be more effective at popping stuff, especially in the front row. This is going to make it hard for them to commit to the board, and we can take advantage of that by repeatedly hitting them because we can make such easy numbers. Going up against Cairo, we do have the possibility of popping Conroe before he can go off, so holding on to Gwyn's and Amon's for certain points is going to be very useful. Be careful because, like I was talking about in my tournament video, I focused too much on trying to take care of Conroe and Mecha Trainer that I would damage deny them and then not be able to capitalize on it, and it feels like those were games that I had lost just because I was never able to catch up. Speaking of Spike Brothers and Mecha Trainer, other cards that they are going to be relying on is Assault Squad and Deadly Dan, which we will have a very easy time dealing with because of Amon's machine gunning. So the earlier we can turn off those, the more they're going to have to play more of them, and then they're going to have to run out of them eventually. Because once you cut them at the legs like that, it's just going to be really hard for them to catch up. So Tsukuyomi is a deck that you're going to run into a lot, but it is a deck that I have the least amount of experience playing against with this build. So just trying to think about what Tsukuyomi is going to do. You're not going to want to be very aggressive with your soul charging because you do have the possibility of decking out, which I did do in the tournament. It was against Blouse though, but it is a possibility with this deck. It can over soul charge and deck out. So just know going into that you're going to have a grindier matchup. Trying to keep up with them is going to be more about keeping pressure on the board at certain points in the game, because once we get into the late game, it's just going to be harder and harder for us to catch up, especially once they are able to hit the point in their deck where they've started stacking. So my final thoughts for the deck is Amon's my boy. I owe a lot of my card fighting history to Amon. He has a lot of room for growth. He has a lot of support later on in the game. I don't know when that'll come to zero, but he has a lot of flexibility later on. I know that he is played in Blade Wing decks as a backup, just because this back row machine gunning is a very efficient way of dealing with boards. Yes, bringing Dark Irregulars to the tournament was slightly a strategy. I felt like a lot of people didn't really know how to deal with boards that Dark Irregulars can make, or what some of the cards maybe do. But really, it was more about just kind of paying respect to the deck that has kind of been with me throughout my entire Vanguard experience. There were many times in the tournament where I did not have a Mon in my hand, and I was going to have to ride something I really didn't want to. And then right before my turn 3, I would top deck a Mon. This happened at least 4 times. And every time I would like jump out of my chair out of excitement of seeing him. I feel like this deck has a lot of growing to do in this game, but I feel like the more time and respect that we players put into this deck, the more it will pay us back.